Welcome to another episode of Fork Candles, where we explore medicine, child neurology, and critical appraisal skills. As always, this is an educational endeavor and should not be interpreted as medical advice. Each patient and situation is unique and should be addressed by your personal healthcare provider. Today I want to share with you two things that I find absolutely amazing about the 1954 Salk Vaccine trial. This, of course, was the first polio vaccine trial, and it is the best example I've come across that demonstrates the volunteer bias. And the second thing I want to show you is the sheer size of this trial. Starting with the volunteer bias, let's go ahead and first look at the randomized control arm over here. These are all second graders that the researchers asked their parents if they would be willing to have their children in a double-blinded placebo trial. The parents of these children jumped at the opportunity of getting protected against polio, while these parents said, "No, thank you. I don't want my child to be any part of this experiment." So half of the volunteer children got the polio vaccine, while the other half got injected with saline. As you can see over here, no spoiler, the vaccine was efficacious. The case rate in the vaccine arm was 16 per 100,000 children. And what I mean by cases is this is paralytic polio, which of course is the outcome patients care about. I'll come back to this one when I discuss the size of the trial later. You can see that those that got the saline injection had a case rate of 57 per 100,000 children. This is usually the only data we ever see. We don't usually see what happened to those that did not volunteer for the trial, but the researchers also kept track of the cases in those children. If this is the only data we have, it would seem that getting a saline injection puts you at greater risk of getting paralytic polio, because you can see the case rate in those that got nothing was 36 per 100,000. Now, if we stop there, we would be really stuck to explain what went on. However, due to the controversies around the development of this vaccine trial, there was a separate design that was being run simultaneously. This was actually the first proposed design, and they had to add the placebo design later to appease their critics. In this design, again, they asked the parents of the second graders if they would want their children to receive the vaccine. However, if they volunteered their child, they were guaranteed that that child received the vaccine. The control was to compare it to first and third graders who did not receive anything. However, they continued to track the case rate amongst those second graders that refused to partake in the trial. As you can see, again, the case rate for those who got vaccinated was pretty much identical to what was shown in the other design, while the control was slightly less, with 46 per 100,000. Now bear with me for a moment as I expand on this, but let's pretend we went ahead and took the case rate of those that received the saline injection and multiplied it by those that were vaccinated. So essentially what I'm saying is that rather than receiving the vaccine, everyone got a saline injection. If we take that 57 per 100,000 and multiply it by the children that were vaccinated, we get a number of 114. If we go ahead and add up these numbers, we get 350. Now to get our denominator, we add up all these second graders, which includes both those that volunteered and importantly, also those that refused, which gives us a number of 740,752. Now, if we take 350 and divide by that number and multiply it by 100,000, we get a case rate of 47 per 100,000 children, which is pretty much identical to those in the observed trial, which included children that would have both volunteered and refused. This is pretty amazing. What this clearly shows is that there is a difference between people who volunteer for a trial and those that do not. Saline does not cause polio. The explanation lies in the fact that polio is transmitted via fecal-oral route. Those living in conditions with lower levels of hygiene standards had higher levels of exposure to polio early on, and therefore would have higher rates of immunity. Before concluding that the volunteers were children of germophobic parents, which many probably were, remember that in the 1950s, a quarter of Americans had no flush toilets, and in some states, that number was greater than 50%, and around 35% of homes did not have complete plumbing. The volunteers were at a higher risk of paralytic polio because they most likely had lower levels of polio immunity due to differences in hygiene access and standards. Now, the volunteer bias does not mean volunteers are always going to be at a higher risk for bad outcomes. It is often the opposite, as those that volunteer can have numerous other advantages that put them at lower risk for bad outcomes than those that refuse. But again, the take-home point is that people who volunteer for trials are different than those that refuse, whether in behavior, socioeconomic status, or baseline health. Now, jumping over briefly to the size of the trial. Most everyone of that era was exposed to polio in childhood. Most infections never lead to any symptoms, and less than 1% lead to paralysis. To pick up that signal, the trial would need to be very large. To detect 50% efficacy, they initially estimated they would need 40,000 in each group, but due to factors most notably the variation in cases of polio each year, they knew that they would need significantly higher numbers. For example, look how different the incidence was in 1932 compared to 1952. Also, they could have used non-paralytic polio to make the sample size significantly smaller. But beyond the fact that this isn't what the public cared about, operationally, the researchers felt that there would be a considerable amount of misdiagnoses, as the symptoms of non-paralytic polio overlap considerably with many other illnesses. So in the end, they were left running this massive trial. To put this in perspective, there were roughly 47 million children at the time in the US compared to 73 million today. 400,000 children received a vaccine in this trial, and they tracked cases amongst 1.8 million children. This is a pretty amazing trial.
So that's it for now. Please let me know what I overlooked or got wrong in the comment section down below. And remember, as always, human diseases and disorders are problems to be solved, not contests to be won. Let's help each other solve them together.